The smell of fermented fish can divide dinner tables around the world, and yet it kept human communities alive for millennia. Ancient mariners, coastal villagers, and imperial merchants all trusted jars of putrid liquid to preserve protein through long winters and long voyages. The story that follows is not merely about bad smells or brave palates, but about a human technology that rewired taste and commerce across continents. In this video, we will follow thread lines from Bronze Age kitchens to modern haute cuisine plates with cinematic curiosity and historical patience. We will ask simple questions about survival, taste, and power, and then answer them through recipes, marketplaces, science, and stubborn regional traditions that still refuse to modernize. Fermenting fish began as an improvisation against waste and hunger in coastal societies that lacked refrigeration and reliable meat supplies. Small communities discovered that salt, sun, and time could turn delicate flesh into dense, long-lasting protein with a shelf life measured in months rather than days. Those early experiments were messy and smelly, and yet they became foundational culinary sciences that spread along trade winds and river routes. Archaeologists have found residues of fermented fish in pottery shards from the Bronze Age and earlier, revealing that humans developed this technique in multiple places independently. This convergence suggests that fermentation was a natural solution to a global problem, and that different societies refined it according to their environment, available fish stocks, and cultural tastes. The Mediterranean world offers one of the clearest windows into ancient fish fermentation through the Roman product called garum, which became both a condiment and an industry. Garum was not an artisanal rarity in Roman kitchens, but a mass-produced sauce sold in amphorae and traded across the empire like wine and olive oil. The word itself appears in market accounts, law codes, and even poetry, showing how integration into everyday life turned a preservation technique into cultural glue. Garum production was concentrated near coasts, where fish were plentiful and access to salt and sunlight was reliable, turning small towns into export centers. Workshops filled with vats and vats of fermenting guts and blood, and the resulting liquid was siphoned, taxed, and shipped along Roman roads to become indispensable at banquets and simple hearths alike. Garum had different grades and textures that reflected both price and prestige in Roman dining culture, revealing a sophisticated appetite for layered umami flavors. The highest grade, termed liquamen in some sources, was prized for clarity and aroma and often used sparingly by the elite to season sauces and meats. Lower grades, often darker and cloudier, seasoned everyday stews and fed laborers, showing how fermented fish spanned social classes through quantity and subtlety. Roman recipes called for garum in complex combinations with wine, spices, and herbs, and its presence in manuscripts helps historians reconstruct lost culinary practices. When merchants labeled amphorae with production sites and quality stamps, they created early examples of food branding and traceability that linked taste to geography in surprising ways. The process to make classical garum was industrial and biological in equal measure, relying on enzymatic breakdown of fish tissues by naturally occurring microbes and enzymes. Workers layered small oily fish with sea salt in open vats and left them to macerate under sun and breeze until the flesh liquefied into a rich, aromatic serum. The deepest, clearest liquid was drained off, filtered, and sold as garum, while the solids were sometimes mixed into paste or used as fertilizer, creating near zero waste in production cycles. This combination of salt, time, and microbial action is the core principle behind all fermented fish, regardless of geography or species used. The specifics of bacteria, salt concentration, and temperature created different end products, but the underlying chemistry turned dangerous spoilage into safe, flavorful preservation that humans learned to harness reliably. While garum flourished around the Mediterranean, similar processes took shape across Asia, producing sauces and paste that transformed local diets and trade networks. In Southeast Asia, long before modern fish sauce factories, small coastal communities fermented anchovies and other small fish into pungent liquids that became staples of Vietnamese, Thai, and Khmer cuisines. These condiments were more than flavorings, they were portable nutrition, tradable currency, and carriers of regional identity with recipes passed down through generations. By the late first millennium, written references to fish sauces appear in Chinese and Southeast Asian records, indicating their integration into agricultural cycles and market economies. Salt works and fishing seasons shaped when and how communities made fish sauce, and those rhythms of production reinforced social rituals from festivals to everyday family meals. In East Asia, fermented seafood evolved into distinct products such as Japanese shiokara and Korean gyogol, showing how fermentation adapted to temperate climates and different palates. Shiokara is a viscous, Salty dish made from marine animal guts, while jokol includes salted shrimp or fish that age into concentrated pastes and sauces. These products were used not only for preservation, but also as seasoning bases for soups, rice, and ceremonial dishes, connecting everyday sustenance to seasonal celebration. The Korean tradition integrated fermented fish into the broader kimchi and jang ecosystem, where salted fish paste complemented fermented vegetables and soybean paste. These combinations created complex flavor matrices that emphasized fermentation as a culinary philosophy, as much as a preservation technique. Southeast Asian fish sauce, known in Vietnamese as nua si mam and in Thai as nam play, crystallized into regional standards that dramatically influenced global cuisines. These sauces achieved balance between saltiness and deep savory notes through controlled fermentation of anchovies in salt and thyme in wooden barrels. Whole family palates were shaped by these sauces, and the recipes became household heirlooms that linked individual identity to coastal ecology and seasonal harvest cycles. As European colonial powers encountered Southeast Asia, they exported both fish sauce and the taste it created, leading to hybridizations and new culinary dialogue. Today, the umami profile of these sauces has been accepted worldwide, but their origins remain rooted in small-scale, time-honored practices that many producers still uphold. Back in the north, Viking and Scandinavian societies developed their own fermented fish traditions adapted to cold climates and limited salt supplies. Surströmming from Sweden and Karl from Iceland are extreme examples, where fermentation and controlled spoilage produced intensely odorous foods that few dared to open without caution. These methods relied on cold curing and longer aging, turning fatty fish into aromatic, potent items that became festive staples in otherwise sparse winter diets. Surströmming is fermented Baltic herring pressed into tins and aged until the odor bursts forth when opened, creating social rituals around its consumption that involve flatbreads, potatoes, and layers of caution. Karl, which involves burying and then curing Greenland shark, removes toxins through long fermentation, demonstrating that fermentation can render otherwise inedible species into edible and culturally revered food. The science behind fermented fish is a story of enzymes, microbes, and salt-balancing chemical reactions that normally cause decay into controlled transformation. Proteases from fish bodies and microbial communities break down proteins into amino acids, producing glutamate that creates the umami sensation people crave in fish sauces. Salt acts as both preservative and flavor concentrator by inhibiting harmful bacteria, while favoring halotolerant microorganisms that guide fermentation toward desirable sensory outcomes. Temperature and oxygen exposure shape microbial succession in fermentation. That's which is why regional climates lead to distinct flavors, and why traditional wooden barrels often contribute unique microbial terroir. Modern food scientists can replicate these conditions in labs, but artisanal producers still argue that living microflora inherited from barrels and coastal air cannot be fully reproduced. Fermentation also increased food security in pre-industrial societies by converting perishable catches into transportable commodities that supported trade and armies. Garum amphorae were staples on Roman supply ships, and Asian fish sauce barrels traveled inland, allowing cities to access coastal protein year-round. This logistic advantage underwrote military campaigns and urban growth, showing that fermented fish shaped geopolitics as much as gastronomy when supply lines ran on preserved flavors. Markets formed around seasons and salt works in predictable patterns that empires exploited through taxation and regulation, which in turn professionalized production methods. The economic footprint of fermented fish extended to ancillary industries like cooperages, salt mining, and pottery making, producing a ripple effect that anchored local economies to global consumption patterns. Not all fermented fish tasted the same, and many were intentionally crafted to be strong, pungent, and polarizing in ways that signal cultural belonging. What smells intolerable to one foreign guest can taste like home and comfort to another, reflecting how early societies cultivated acquired taste through repeated exposure and social meaning. Communities taught children to appreciate fermented flavors through ritualized meals and incremental seasoning, effectively socializing palates across generations. Taste preferences also reflected scarcity and abundance, in that richer households could use fine garum sparingly while poorer families relied on potent paste to boost bland staples. Thus, fermented fish became not only flavor enhancers but also markers of class and cultural identity layered into the social fabric of many societies. Around the world, there are more regional varieties of fermented fish than most people can imagine, each reflecting local species, climate, and cultural values in its taste and production. In the Philippines, Bagong and pattis take center stage in stews and dips, while in Vietnam, nuoc mam serves as both seasoning and dipping sauce for complex street foods. These regional differences reveal how human ingenuity turns local constraints into distinctive culinary expressions that communicate place and history. In coastal West Africa and the Caribbean, fermented fish and fish paste also developed through contact with European and Asian techniques, creating hybrid flavors that testify to migration and exchange. Each product carries a genealogy of trade routes, colonization, and adaptation that can be tasted by those who listen closely to their complexities. The production methods of fermented fish were often gendered and communal, embedding social roles in foodways and seasonal labor practices. Women frequently oversaw domestic fermentation processes, passing down recipes and techniques that were integral to household economies. Men often managed commercial salting and transport, which connected rural production with urban demand, creating interdependent roles that structured community life and knowledge transmission. Those social patterns shifted under industrialization as factories centralized production, reduced the need for household labor, and standardized flavors for mass markets. While efficiency increased, some argue that mechanization eroded the cultural richness encoded in artisanal methods, and today a revivalist movement seeks to reclaim those lost sensory histories. Industrialization brought new scales of production to fermented fish, producing cheap, consistent sauces that conquered global supermarkets and restaurant kitchens. Factories optimized salt ratios, used stainless steel vats, and controlled temperature to guarantee a predictable product that chefs could rely on. This modernization made fish sauce ubiquitous in global supply chains, but it also flattened regional variation and often relied on monoculture fishing that strained marine ecosystems. More recently, craft producers and chefs have pushed back by emphasizing traceability, sustainable sourcing, and barrel aging practices that resurrect lost flavors. They argue that taste and environmental stewardship must go hand in hand, and that preserving traditional methods can support biodiversity and coastal livelihoods. Culinary innovators and Michelin-starred chefs have reincorporated fermented fish into modern gastronomy, reframing pungent condiments as refined umami tools. Deconstructed sauces and clarified reductions appear on tasting menus that invite diners to confront their own sensory assumptions. By reframing preservation into artistry, chefs connect ancient practice to contemporary taste, allowing fermented fish to appear in contexts ranging from casual street food to refined tasting experiences. This renaissance also raises questions about authenticity and appropriation, given that many high-end reinterpretations are divorced from the cultural and economic context that created the originals. Responsible culinary exploration thus requires attention to provenance and fair compensation for traditional producers, not merely aesthetic reinterpretation. The strong flavors of fermented fish demand psychological and cultural work from diners who choose to love them, and that work reveals much about human taste formation. Repeated exposure, social endorsement, and associative memory convert initial disgust into pleasure for many, illustrating how taste is learned rather than fixed. The emotions mixed with these flavors often involve nostalgia, identity, and resistance to culinary orthodoxies pushed by global industrial taste standards. When newcomers to a cuisine first try fermented fish, they often need ritualized guidance from seasoned eaters who teach context and pairing rules. Learning these rules can be a profound act of cultural translation, shifting not only palates but also the way people relate to unfamiliar communities and history. Fermented fish also intersects with questions of sustainability and marine stewardship in the modern era, where overfishing and pollution challenge traditional supply chains. Small producers reliant on local catches face shrinking stocks and volatile markets, which pressures them to either scale up unsafely or give up ancestral knowledge. Efforts to certify sustainable fisheries and support small-scale producers are becoming crucial if we want to keep these culinary traditions alive for future generations. Innovation can help by pairing ancient fermentation know-how with modern conservation science, creating products that honor tradition while ensuring stocks remain viable. This partnership gives fermented fish a potential role in regenerative coastal economies rather than allowing it to become a relic of a disappearing way of life. The sensory science of fermented fish continues to reveal why certain condiments trigger such powerful responses in human perception and memory. High levels of glutamate and short-chain fatty acids interact with olfactory receptors to create profound savory sensations and complex aroma profiles that can be alluring or repulsive. Neuroscientists studying cross-cultural taste find that context and expectation often determine whether a fermented scent is labeled delicious or disgusting long before a person takes a bite. This cognitive framing shows that tastes are social technologies as much as biological reactions, shaped by language, ritual, and history. Understanding this helps explain why some societies flourish with pungent fermented foods while others resist them, and how chefs can use narrative to reframe and introduce powerful flavors to new audiences. Regional case studies illuminate the human stories embedded in fermented fish traditions, stories of migration, adaptation, and resilience across centuries. In Vietnam, Nua Si Mam factories maintained village economies while shaping the national palate, creating products with both local pride and export value. In Sweden, Surströmming festivals preserve social rituals around an almost theatrical approach to consumption that bonds communities through shared risk and reward. These case studies emphasize that fermented fish is not merely a culinary curiosity, but a living archive of ancestral knowledge and communal identity. Each jar, barrel, or tin carries within it a lineage of technique, taste, and adaptation that reads like a cultural map. The modern market has also commodified fermented fish with global brands that streamline flavor while often obscuring origin stories and production ethics. Supermarket bottles can offer convenience and consistency that home cooks appreciate, but they also encourage monocultural sourcing and industrial fishing methods. Consumers increasingly demand transparency, which has led to niche brands labeling fish species, salt sources, and barrel ages to reconnect taste with provenance. This consumer pressure offers a path to improve sustainability and cultural respect through informed purchasing where small premiums support ethical producers. The market can therefore become a steward rather than a destroyer of tradition when buyers prioritize traceability and fair practices. Fermented fish is also a pedagogical tool in culinary education, teaching chefs about balance, fermentation, and the power of time in flavor development. Culinary schools increasingly include modules on fermentation and preservation that emphasize microbial stewardship and sensory training. Aspiring chefs learn that patience and respect for traditional timing can unlock complex flavors not achievable through instant methods or synthetic additives. When chefs bring these lessons into restaurants and classrooms, they help demystify pungent products and build bridges across culinary cultures. This pedagogy reframes fermented fish from exotic oddity into a masterclass in how humanized science enhances flavor and sustainability simultaneously. The resilience of fermented fish in global diets speaks to its dual role as practical preservation and taste accelerator across climates and centuries, whether layered into Roman garum recipes, Thai curries, or Swedish smorgasbords. These products extended human control over perishability and transformed scarcity into culinary culture. They also reveal the adaptability of human societies to harness microbial life as culinary partners in ways that blur the line between survival and artistry. This adaptability suggests a broader lesson about human ingenuity in the face of resource constraints and changing environments, where taste itself becomes a technology. The survival of fermented fish throughout history implies that sustainability and flavor can co-evolve when communities respect ecological limits and cultural continuity. Before we end, consider the paradox that something once born out of necessity now operates as both a nostalgic heirloom and a trend in modern cuisine. Fermented fish brings together the ancient and the contemporary, the smelly and the sublime, connecting hungry sailors and starch chefs through a common chemistry of salt and thyme. In that paradox, we find a lesson about how technologies of scarcity can become technologies of beauty when people commit to preservation as practice and philosophy. If you taste a drop of fish sauce today and find it transformative, remember that the flavor is an archive of labor, ecosystem, and centuries of trial and error. The tang you enjoy connects you to fishermen, women fermenters, and artisans who sustained communities through hard weather and political upheaval. In the end, fermented fish teaches us about choices humans made to survive and to celebrate, and how those choices etch themselves into taste and identity. The next time someone winces at a tin of Surströmming or inhales a bowl of Nuoc sham, remember that those reactions are part of a larger history of ingenuity and adaptation. Our modern palates are heirs to those experiments, and they can choose whether to preserve these traditions or let them fade quietly into museum cases. If this exploration gave you a new perspective on taste, history, or sustainability, consider subscribing for more stories that connect food to power and human ingenuity. If you learned something surprising, leave a comment about the strangest fermented food you have tried and join the conversation about how we value cultural knowledge in a globalized world. Credits and further reading appear now with recommendations for curious viewers who want to dig deeper into primary sources and modern research. Look for archaeological reports on Garum amphora trenches, ethnographies of Southeast Asian saltworks, and contemporary scientific papers on proteolysis in fish fermentation for technical depth and original accounts. These materials help bridge the cinematic story you just watched with rigorous scholarship and living producers working today. We will also link to documentaries, cookbooks, and sustainable fisheries organizations that support traditional producers and ethical sourcing practices. If you want to try making small-scale fermented fish at home, respect local regulations, and start with low-risk experiments under guidance to avoid food safety issues. Practical tips for those wanting to taste or cook with fermented fish include starting with small quantities and pairing with neutral foods, like rice or potatoes. Culinary pairings often use fermented fish to raise savory depth without overwhelming, so balance with acidity, fat, and sweetness for approachable dishes. If you encounter extreme odors, open cans outside and introduce the condiment gently into sauces, allowing time for the aroma to integrate and mellow. If you are adventurous and want to try making your own, begin with researched recipes that recommend precise salt ratios, suitable fish species, and controlled temperatures. Safety is paramount, so respect traditional knowledge, use sanitary equipment, and consult fermentation communities before attempting large-scale batches. Cultural sensitivity matters when engaging with fermented fish traditions that hold deep communal significance and historical context. Avoid treating these foods as mere curiosities and instead approach them as expressions of ancestral practice often tied to rituals, diets, and economic survival. Buying directly from local producers or certified ethical brands helps ensure that your culinary curiosity supports living communities rather than exploits them for novelty. Engagement can also be educational, where taste experiences are coupled with learning about the environmental and labor practices behind the product. This fuller approach transforms a single bite into a respectful exchange rather than a spectacle detached from its makers. The aesthetic of fermented fish has also inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers who use pungent flavors as metaphors for memory, decay, and cultural survival. In literature and cinema, these condiments often signal otherness, nostalgia, or generational continuity, providing powerful sensory shorthand that layers narrative, meaning artists have collaborated with fermenters to create installations and tasting events that explore the intersections of smell, identity, and history in immersive forms. These creative projects expand the dialogue beyond gastronomy into ethical storytelling, where the sensory experience becomes a medium to discuss migration, climate change, and heritage. They remind us that food can be both a practical necessity and a profound language for communicating complex human experiences. Modern science continues to refine fermentation knowledge and develop starter cultures that can reproduce desirable flavors while reducing spoilage risks. Researchers isolate specific halitolerant bacteria and yeast strains that produce favorable enzymatic profiles, enabling controlled fermentations that still retain depth. These advances offer a compromise between tradition and safety, supporting small producers who wish to scale responsibly without sacrificing character. However, some purists insist that part of the magic lies in the unquantified terroir of messy barrels and ambient microbes, which cannot be fully replicated in sterile cultures. This tension between reproducibility and mystery is itself part of the charm and challenge of fermented fish as both craft and science. As a final reflection, fermented fish forces us to confront how human survival strategies become cultural treasures that shape identity over generations. What began as practical preservation evolved into taste codices, economic engines, and catalysts for innovation that have lasted into our modern kitchens. The pungent sauces and paste that once guaranteed winter calories now challenge our palates, expand culinary vocabularies, and remind us that taste is an archive of human ingenuity. If this exploration opened your senses and curiosity, please subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten technologies and the surprising ways they persist today. Leave a comment about the fermented food that changed your life and share this video with someone who you think needs a new perspective on taste.